Welcome back to the Industrial Transformation Podcast. I am Jeremy Frank, and I have the pleasure of sitting down today with Jake Hall. Jake Hall, many of you may know better as the Manufacturing Millennial. Jake has built a large social media following and as an advocate for manufacturing, automation, digital transformation, and skilled trades. All things that I'm very interested in. He has a background in engineering, background also in manufacturing, of course, and in entrepreneurship as well. So, Jake, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, wonderful. So glad to have a conversation with you. And I would probably like to just start off by just asking you, why you're the manufacturing millennial. What drives your passion for this topic, and how did you get going on this?
Yeah, so my background's been in the manufacturing automation space since I was a kid. I worked for a machine builder starting at 16 years old, and been in the industry ever since. The manufacturing millennial is the idea of, well, besides having a good ring to it, it's to drive awareness to this younger generation that's entering the industry. Even though the millennials as a generation are actually the largest workforce out there globally, and the manufacturing, they're not the largest workforce. In fact, they're one of the smaller ones behind the Gen X's and the Boomers. But the idea for the manufacturing millennials, how do we better drive awareness to attracting a future workforce into manufacturing, and how do manufacturers begin to leverage newer generations of technology that millennials and younger people are growing up with into their factory floor? So for me, the whole idea and the brand of what I do as a manufacturing millennial is, sharing content that's in a fun, engaging way that's going to help manufacturers do a better job of understanding what new technology is available, but then also using that technology in a way that's going to attract a future workforce that is going to be desperately needed when, there'll be 2.2 to 2.6 million unfulfilled jobs by 2030.
2.2 to 2.6 million unfulfilled by 2030. What is that number today?
I don't know the exact number. I know there was, I think, 600,000 open jobs right now in manufacturing last month when I checked. But what we're going to be facing right now is, as this older generation of boomers, really the silver tsunami of retirement, is going away, we're just going to see a skyrocket in demand. Take the welders, the skilled trade of welding, for example. Right now, there's about 550,000 certified welders in the U.S. Or welding positions, yet the average age of them is like 56 years old, I think, right now. So fast forward 10 years, well, a lot of these welders are probably not going to be in the factory floor when they're 60, mid 60s. What's going to fill that demand of all those skills leaving? And that's just across all skilled trades. And it's not even just the skilled trades. It's just controls engineers, designers, programmers, the people who are coming up with the new technology and innovation to drive manufacturing forward. It's a critical industry that is going to need a lot of help with future work.
It's pretty shocking, really. I mean, I know we do a lot of work in the auto industry, oil and gas, paper and pulp industry. We see this challenge everywhere, and it seems to shift around, but it's bad everywhere. But the auto industry specifically, I'm picturing Kentucky. I was at a meeting with one of our customers in Kentucky not long ago, and the notable takeaway was that the labor workforce participation was 53% right now. And this huge notable brand is having, positions that they used to post and get thousands of applicants for they're not finding people. And so if that's now, and it's going to get 4 times worse over the next 8 years, that's really a shocking. I mean, a lot of people talk about this, but it, even for me, who talks about it and thinks about it a lot, that's pretty shocking that it's already bad and it's going to get 4 times worse.
Especially with the numbers right now where they're saying the current unemployment rate as a whole in the U.S. is pretty stable to what it was pre-pandemic 2019. Yet there's still all of these massive unfulfilled jobs in manufacturing. So what manufacturers are going to have to realize is their typical hireable workforce has moved on. They're in different industries now. There's a lot of new opportunities that have opened up from them. I mean, 10 years ago, how many people were driving in their car, hauling other people around that weren't a taxi driver? Or how many people were delivering food on an app that people ordered? You have all these different jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago that are pulling the market away. So you're going to see a lot of manufacturers need to find new ways to attract a new workforce. And the workforce, I hate to say it, is no longer your common um, middle-aged white male. Which is the stereotypical of who the manufacturing industry is. We need to become, as an industry, more diverse. We need to do a better job creating a work environment that's more inviting to women and minorities. And I think the biggest thing that we're going to be seeing changing that is the influx of new technology, where everyone, no matter what demographic they're coming from, is familiar with working with their phones, working with instantly accessible information, being able to leverage new technologies to approach how we're handling problems and how we're solving them. And if we can change the work environment and how we do things to make it more inviting, I think that's a massive way that manufacturers can help prepare for this upcoming issue of unemployment. And it's not just unemployment too, right? We're facing supply chain issues in manufacturing. So we're having manufacturers figure out, okay, now it's not just how do I get parts overseas? How do I have better accessibility to what my tier suppliers are doing and where they're getting their components from? So you see this data centric idea of a more interconnected, centralized supply chain for manufacturers. You're seeing, other conversations that are happening in the industry right now are like cybersecurity is massive, right? As we implement new technologies into manufacturing, which is important, what are all the risks that are coming in terms of, phishing or cybersecurity attacks or ransomware is massive in the industry, right? You go out there and you have a PLC that's now protecting your network where they're going to go in, they're going to lock you out, they're going to shut down your machine. How are you going to fix that? So there's all these different areas out there that manufacturers are going to have to start addressing quickly if they're not already.
I totally agree. And what I find fascinating about what you're doing, I mean, so we live that world. Our whole company is we're doing that, like the
Mhm.
technology part, bringing that technology in to elevate people to go out and solve these problems, but also allows you to have a more resilient workforce that's more appealing to other diverse groups, younger groups, people that are more familiar with technology. We're living that all day, every day. What I see that's so interesting about what you're doing is that I see a lot of people talking about this problem. The silver tsunami, call it.
Mhm.
There's a variety of names, but especially among the entrenched, the large organizations that are the biggest manufacturers, but really just across the board, most people talk about this problem, but aren't able to articulate what to do about it.
Yeah.
And what I see you doing is especially this piece of it, like increasing awareness and just attracting these people and helping people realize that it's an attractive place to want to be employed. I'm
Yeah.
just so curious, like what you're doing there and why you're doing that.
Yeah,
With your
I mean, for me, I think what needs to be happening right now is, like you said, you have all these large companies that are doing that, but at the end of the day, large companies is not what's driving America. 98% of manufacturers in America are small companies under, somewhere between 100 to 500 employees. That's the actual number. And when you look at where these manufacturers are getting their labor force from, it's locally. So, how do manufacturers do a better job working locally with their communities to help drive better engagement to get kids excited about manufacturing? So I'm a huge advocate of how do we help develop manufacturers to go into local high schools and community colleges to say, look at this career path beyond just your typical 4-year degree that you can be a part of with manufacturing and create a great paying, sustainable long-term career. Um, but the big thing as well that I think is really important is how do we dispel the myths that manufacturing is this dark, dirty, dangerous, dull environment? And in some cases, it is, and it will continue to be that way depending on what your industry it is. Right? You're not going to be walking into a steel mill industry and expecting it to look like a clean white floor of a manufacturing circuit plant. They're different, right? But what the general consensus is, regardless of what industry you're using, how are you leveraging technology to make younger lives entering the workforce either? How do we create a better retention rate in the area? So, like, what I do is really pushing manufacturers is how do we? I love sharing content on LinkedIn of exciting new things that are happening in manufacturing because I want I want end users and manufacturers to have a better understanding of what solutions that are out there that are working successfully. It's not just a theoretical lab demonstration, it's an actual manufacturing process. And what problems are we solving? Um, and by leveraging automation, I'm a firm believer that robots create jobs, they don't take jobs. Robots remove people from boring, dull, repetitive, high turnover tasks that then end up costing the manufacturer more money because they have to retrain and reuse people. I'd rather automate that cell that's a high turnover rate, create a better skilled position that hopefully that manufacturer then can train their current employees to learn, and then create a better value for everybody. And I think where my I guess you could say, Jeremy, is where my push for getting more millennials and Gen Zs involved is they are the people that are the most familiar with new technology, right? KCF, you guys have a lot of interesting technology when it comes to condition monitoring, remote access, and all that stuff. Where does a lot of that take place? It takes place on a cell phone. It takes place on the iPad. It takes place on the internet through a web browser. Well, what was once very um, imitating for a older generation, such as a boomer or a later Gen X, and installing an app, setting something up, connecting devices, creating a dashboard. That sounds very intimidating for an older generation, yet younger generations are doing that just for fun through games and through apps. I mean, a great example is last year there was like 16 million 3D printers sold in the US to households. Well, 3D printer is a form of additive manufacturing. It's a manufacturing process, but a lot of younger generations are pulling it up because it's exciting, it's fun. They can design something in online through a software, create it digitally, and then print it and see a physical device. That's exciting. That's happening. The same thing with like Raspberry Pis and Arduino boards, right? You have all these younger generations that are excited about being the tinkerers of this new technology, where an older generations had erector sets and link logs and Lego and all this other stuff. It's just we enjoy tinkering. It's just we love tinkering digitally in solutions. And how can we then, like I said, leverage manufacturers to take solutions that are digital on a very common device that everyone holds every day, which is a cell phone, and connect younger generation skills to a solution that a manufacturer can be benefiting from.
Yeah. I agree. I see it happening. I see what you're doing is really important just because attracting, diversity, whether it's ethnic or gender diversity it's really important, but it's definitely not happening enough. And so anybody that's working on that is just vital. I'm curious, and I want to go a little deeper on that. I want to start with the different sectors. So from what you're doing, I imagine you get exposed to, we're in auto manufacturing over here, oil and gas over there, forest products, building products, chemicals. Are there certain industries and or certain like regions in our country or other countries where you see different patterns where it's either going better or worse in terms of solving the labor problem and getting more diversity into the workforce?
I mean, great question. I think there was I can't remember exactly what book it was, Jeremy, but there was an article about years ago when steel companies wanted to build a new building. They chose it not based necessarily on resources, but where the labor was. Right. That's why you sometimes see a lot of these manufacturing plants in the middle of country is because they said if I can hire a bunch of farmers to come and work for me who have a good work ethic, we can train them on how to run skills. So I think it's that mantra of what we did 20, 30 years ago of how to attract people into manufacturing. Well, today it's a lot harder when you're competing with a bunch of different industries. So in terms of sectors where it's harder to get jobs, I don't know for certain where that is. All I do know is that the battle for labor in most circumstances is local. And so if you're a manufacturer that's just going to be expecting people when they graduate high school to come knock on your door to come and say, hey, I want to work for you because they saw there was a sign hiring out front, and they normally just went in, they filled out some paperwork, and they said, okay, you start at 8 a.m. tomorrow. That's not the case anymore with what manufacturing is, or people just walking up to you to apply. You need to go out and what I would call as the prerequisite interview is you need to go and engage with that audience or your future workforce before you even think that they're going to come and work for you one day. So to answer your question, is it a specific industry? No, it's every industry right now. They're battling labor shortages across the board. Is it any location or region? No. I mean, it's one of those things where different states are battling different areas. I think one of the things that we look at is it's also what other companies or what other markets are entering in that industry. For example, I'm in West Michigan. Well, when this giant company that rolled in that at one point in time sold a bunch of books, and now they're an online distributor that you can buy anything with 2-day shipping, that rolls in. Well, geez, a lot of manufacturers lost a ton of their workforce overnight to go work for company A. And that's not just my area. I hear stories of down in Ohio where Whirlpool's located, where Amazon opened up some massive distribution centers there, and all of a sudden their labor force it gets pulled out of manufacturing to go work in the warehouse distribution center. So it's not just even a regional thing. It's like manufacturers are no longer competing with another manufacturer down the street. They're competing with every other industry that's out there now as a general pool of labor.
And this, so yeah, I hear that. So it's basically the problem is shared and uniform.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to the company size thing, but first, what you were talking about before, and I certainly live this, see this, the adoption of technology that actually elevates people. It replaces the mundane, it replaces the dangerous, dull and dirty jobs. Some of them, many of them, ideally most of them, and it creates better jobs, but it also creates this resilience and the ability to engage people. That's a path. It's not the only path, but do you see that happening better or worse anywhere? The solution to the problem. What patterns are you seeing in who is adopting or who is not, or do you see everyone being kind of caught with their pants down?
Yeah, I mean, I see companies. Industry 4.0 is a terminology of it's not a technology, it's not a specific solution, it's a cultural change. But within this technology, I see the manufacturers who are winning are adapting technology that makes a process that is a manual process for a worker less strenuous. If that's physically, that's an option. If it's mentally, that's another option. If it's decision making, that's another option. For example, there's a solution out there that puts projected light onto a table, and that it digitally instructs the operator through projected light how to assemble a series of manual parts together. I've seen solutions where an operator was manually doing this. They were following a 3-ring binder going page by page by page to see how they're doing this manual assembly, where they said, this is boring, it's mundane, there's a lot of errors, there's a lot of critical things, it's very high in training. Well, when a company who's an automotive company adapted this solution, now all of a sudden the operator is the manual process is guiding the operator through an individual for a simulated step every time and checking the quality of that step, where it's something that can't be fully automated because it's too low of a batch run to fully build in a bunch of robots and automations and all that and PLCs and all this stuff, but it's enough to help guide an operator through something. That's where I'm seeing the biggest benefit from is, well, first of all, right now, if you want a new piece of automation equipment on your floor, you're 8 months out, a year out, right? So, I mean, even if like you said, you know what, we're going to automate this. If you wrote a company a check today, you're not getting it till maybe Q1 of 2023, Q2 of 2023. So what are the changes now that you can implement that are going to start making a difference? I think a lot of that has to do with guiding manual processes, making condition monitoring and preventive maintenance an easier task for operators. leveraging augmented reality to guide operators through training, creating better work instructions for people. So if they're going out there and they need to complete a job one day of all these different parts that needed to either put through a press or an injection molding machine or assemble, they're not going up to a timesheet and pulling postcards out of an area and then having to wheel over there and get all the parts and supplies. It's all digitally, it's printed out, it's fully traceable. So how manufacturers are winning in the current state is by leveraging simple solutions in the digital space to make the worker, to make the operation of a worker easier. And that's where I see a lot of wins happening right now.
So there's a really interesting distinction there that others on this podcast have talked about. Dr. Jeffrey Liker, notably, he wrote the Toyota Way book, studied up on lean manufacturing a lot. And I think there's parallels of that. There's something really interesting because I used 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, we've been in this game for a long time, building technology for smart manufacturing. And 5 years ago, especially 10 years ago, people used to talk about the dark factory, black, factory that's fully automated, no people, and all automatic, everything sensorized, and as the ideal. People used to talk about that as the ideal. And if you talk to like Dr. Liker's point of view is that that's really not the ideal, because more what you're describing, projecting onto a table so that a person can do the job. The person's still there, but doing it faster, safer, more effectively, less wear and tear. Same thing. I mean, we're in that condition monitoring PDM world, just eradicating machine health issues, but we don't try to make it automatic. Like hypothetically, you could have auto lube systems with machines that do their own maintenance, and maybe one day that'll happen. But the point of view that it's actually the ideal to have an elevated person who's there in building and learning and participating, rather than a location where the person is not there. I'm curious, have you thought on that, or do you have any opinions in that category?
So you're saying like remote accessibility?
I can. So if you took the Industry 4.0, right? Industry
Yep.
4.0 as an ideal. The ideal, if you just read, lots of people will write their paragraph about what that means. And
Yeah.
it varies a bit, but generally data everywhere, perfect analysis that happens automatically. And a lot of problems go away because we have all the right information, we have all the right automation, and the technology almost eliminates the need for people and learning.
Yeah.
Whereas to some extent, it runs counter to lean manufacturing, which is that the person who is at the gemba, the person close to the problem, is absolutely the most important thing, because that's where the learning happens.
Yeah.
That's the question. Like, which one do you see as the ideal in this work?
I don't know. I think it's so circumstantial. I think a lot of times we try and create a solution around a specific idea instead of trying to create a solution around the specific problem. And like the idea of lean, for example, is like lean manufacturing is the old Industry 4.0 in a lot of areas. Where lean manufacturing at one point in time was the buzzword. But at the end of the day, I always laugh when I walk into manufacturing facilities and they say, "Oh yeah, we're a lean manufacturer," and I'm like, "No, you're not." I think there was actually a study out there where only 10% of the companies who actually said they were in lean manufacturing were actually lean manufacturing. So I think it's important for a lot of applications where we do build the solution around the operator, and then in some cases we build the operator around the solution. And Elon Musk, I think, had a great quote, Tesla 2 or 3 years ago, when he was building his first gigafactory, and he had this idea that he would just automate everything. And I think after he found out, and there was a lot of struggles with quality and startup, I think one of his quotes was that he said, "Operators are very underappreciated," or something like that, or the human is a very underappreciated tool.
Underrated, I think. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I think it's a great story where here he had this idea of automating everything is the best solution. I don't care how much money I spend on it. Well, he literally had as much money as he wanted to spend on it, but he still learned that humans can create opportunity and better quality than automation can. So it's one of those things. In some cases, yeah, it was 100% a better idea to put in a robot there. And honestly, some other cases, nope, a human operator is going to be the best. And that's just because the operation and changes are too dynamic.
Yeah. The other thing I hear you saying in that is that so it's situational, but the other thing is that humans being what they are, kind of the herd mentality, people love their buzzwords and they love to talk about stuff without necessarily doing anything to solve the problem. And
Yeah,
whether you call it one thing or the other, it's all about, are you actually creating an improved situation that's addressing the problem or not? And
yeah,
I
and that
definitely
was the quote. So yeah, April 14, 2018, Elon Musk says humans are underrated.
underrated.
Excessive automation is a mistake. I mean,
Yep.
so
All right.
I think that's one of those things that, granted, Tesla's a lot different than it was in 2018 today, if you're looking at stock prices of the cars they're producing or whatever. But I think it's something to keep aware of is where do you find the value in? And that's why I think it's one of those things where companies roll out and want to do a digital transformation strategy. And there's companies out there that say, follow these 10 steps to build out your digital transformation. It's like there's no step process because every company is different. You're telling me a Honeywell Aerospace, which is $1 billion company that has 50 different manufacturing facilities in the US, is going to be the same as a $100 million company or a $50 million company. There's every solution's different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what most things. It's all
Yep.
context, right? Context and it's people. So let's come back to that. I want to come back to the kind of the core thing of what you're doing. So you're taking on this major, you know, focus of your life to solve
Yeah.
the and brand. You're branding around the millennial, but really it's just whether it's millennial, it's digitals, it's women, it's just other ethnicities that haven't been represented as much in manufacturing. What are you finding is working? Like when do you find that you're telling your story and you're finding that really resonates with people and they say, oh my gosh, I really believe what Jake's saying and I do want to go pursue that, whether it's in my local community or I want to get a degree from a community college or an engineering school and get into manufacturing because now I've seen the light and I realize how much future there is here. Where do you see that working?
Yeah, I mean, some of the success stories that I've heard is, I've probably gotten since I made a post like 6 months ago of me going back to my local school where I went to, and I went and gave a highlight of what is manufacturing in 2022. I think it was manufacturing in 2020 or something like that. I can't remember. And I made a post about it. I said, I challenge you to go do the exact same thing. You have so much skill right now, and you are the only person who can go out and tell other people that manufacturing is not just dark, dirty, dangerous industry anymore. Go make that change. And I probably had, I would say, at least 15 people message me, Jeremy, saying, "Oh yeah, I went and did this." And I went back and I talked at my local university of upcoming graduates, or I went in and for the kids' career day in high school, or I think it was, I can't remember, it was like the next on track or something like that, where it was encouraging juniors. What are you going to start doing when you hit your senior year? Where are you going to go? And by pushing that post and encourage a lot of other people to go out and do the same because they're saying, listen, if Jake's doing it, there's no reason why I can't do it. And I really think that's where the change is going to be. You and I, we can make as many posts as we want online about all these great ideas, but if you're not making your own initiative in your local community, I think that's where the greatest opportunity is lost. What are you doing as an engineer to go and volunteer at your local first high school robotics program that's happening? What are you doing to encourage your kids who are young to do a Lego League or a First Robotics or a Science Olympiad or all these other STEM programs that are out there? What are you doing to sit down and have a conversation with the guidance counselor at that high school and saying, you're encouraging all these kids to go there, but do you have the latest information on what manufacturing has to offer them? If you don't, love to share with you about what manufacturing as a career could do. And here's 10 companies right now that have trades programs locally where if that kid wants to leave high school and he doesn't want to go into college, great. Have them call up this company and say, I want to be a part of your electrical trade apprentice program. I want to be a part of your HVAC program. I want to go and I want to work at a machine shop and I want you to teach me how to do machining on a lathe or a manual mill, or I want you to teach me how to weld. I think a lot of that stuff is the perception of when I was in high school, and I remember sitting down with my guidance counselor, the discussion of skilled trades never came up, or entering the workforce and going through an apprentice program never came up. For me, it was like, hey, Jake, here's your GPA. This was your ACT score. Great. You can go to the University of Michigan. You can go to Purdue. You can go to MSU. What do you want to do? And like, that's just the options that they gave me. Said, you should go get a 4-year degree and do this. And I'm not saying I regret what I did. I'm glad with the engineerings that I got. But I think a lot of times is we're not giving young kids enough awareness on what can be a great opportunity for them. A kid who might love manufacturing might not be the best at differential equations. And he might leave the industry completely because he was intimidated by physics and math courses, even though he would have been a great designer. He would have been a great fabricator. So giving better awareness to locally, I think is utmostly, Jeremy, where I see the biggest change happening with these conversations is having direct conversations and making the change that way.
Yeah. I see, the one thing I would add that I've seen you do that augments that, it feeds it, but just the connecting with those that are part of this ecosystem of getting the word out. I caught you hosted a panel discussion with a few people that I've actually followed up and talked with. Sherry McCleary from the Penn State Digital Foundry, for one, John Dyke from SESME.
Yeah, it was the SESME workshop, smart clean energy, smart manufacturing center. It's a government funded. It's actually like one of 9 or one of 17 federally funded programs that are designed to help manufacturers leverage new technology. And that's exactly what's happening. So a lot of those innovation centers actually, so that's part of my day job. We haven't talked about that at all, but my day job is I work for Fine Zelstra. We're an industrial tech company that helps manufacturers adapt new technology and solutions through technology. And we're building out our own smart manufacturing innovation center. So in West Michigan, we're going to have all these different demonstrations of augmented reality, digital work instructions, preventative maintenance, robots. And the whole idea is to better educate manufacturers on what new technology is out there. And that's what, we're part of that SESME organization doing.
Love it. We'll have to get you some sensors and some software to
let's do it.
To show people how easy it is. Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, just a couple more questions that I want to ask you really for your perspective on where things are going. And, this broad problem of, being 4 times worse than we are today, 8 years from now in 2030. Yeah. Like talking about where we're going to be in 2024, where we're going to be in 2022, where we're going to be in 2030 is kind of scary in some ways based on what you've described and studied, and a lot of people have looked at it. What I'm curious to ask you is out of all the different aspects of this problem that are described by that shortage of workers and everything else. What's the part that motivates you the most? Like, what's the one thing the problem that if you think you could just snap your fingers and make it go away and have it be actually twice as good in 2030 instead of twice as bad, what would that thing be?
Oh man. Great question. What's the one thing that I could snap my fingers in and make change? I would say it would be removing the fear of people in manufacturing that technology makes their life harder. And if people, I think, were better or we're more comfortable with how to properly integrate new technology and solutions and not just integrate the product, but act on the product, I think we would see a massive change in manufacturing. Industry 4.0, a lot of the initiatives have failed because the technology was available and the technology was right for them. It's just the cultural approach of how they went about it is what was incorrect. So if we could, as a manufacturing company, better leverage the technology that's out there in a way that it was designed to be used, and culturally act on how we make critical changes and decisions on the data, I think that would dramatically impact of how we approach manufacturing. And I think a lot of the discussion of greenfield versus brownfield manufacturing, I think a lot of greenfield manufacturing gets that because it's a new solution, but old manufacturing, it's a high risk of implementing a new solution. And if we can better educate the audiences out there of how this new technology is going to benefit them in the long run, I think that's how we solve that long term, 4 times the unemployment that we're facing now in the next years, is because we're never going to get that. Excuse me, we're never going to get that labor market back ever in manufacturing. We're never going to have the resources or the audience of or employees available to fill that need. So we're going to have to leverage something differently. That's what automation's creating.
Yeah.
And if we can make the human I'm trying to remember, Jeremy. I was actually I was in Cleveland last week, and there was a scale that rated the productivity of an operator over time. And in manufacturing, I think the US ranked like 20th in terms of productivity per dollar amount produced of the capital of the US. And we've actually declined in productivity over time through that operator. So how do we bump up that productivity operator? It's allowing the worker to make better decision makings and removing the boring, repetitive labor tasks out of manufacturing.
Yeah, it's fascinating perspective that I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that as a technologist, starting a technology company to kind of come in and solve that problem, I think it's on us. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons we've been so successful is that we it's easy to approach it the other way, where you build technology that just eliminates the people or doesn't honor the person who's actually there doing the work. So it's one thing to say that the people need to be more receptive, but I think that the technology builders need to be building technology that's built to elevate people rather than failing to respect the knowledge and the expertise that they have, which I've seen a lot of companies fall into that path, and it's I think that's where they've struggled a lot.
Yeah,
Very
I
last
mean,
question before we wrap up. The where do you think it's going to be? Or, like, do you think so? That's the problem. You wish you could snap fingers and solve. Where do you personally think it's going to be in 2030? You think the predictions are right and the world is screwed, and we're just going to
no,
fall off, or do you think
no,
we're going to solve this thing?
no. I mean, manufacturing will always continue to be a backbone of the U.S. economy. I think what we need to be very cautious of is I think we are going to see a continued critical shift in the supply chain domestically, with a lot of product being produced more locally, or at least manufacturers having a better grasp of supply chain issues. I think by 2030, so we could say 8 years, 7.5 years from now, where are we going to be? Um, I sure hope we're different than looking back 7.5 years from now with the adaptation of new technology. If I were to put an outlook on it, in 2030, we are going to, oh, man, I can't even tell you what manufacturing do 6 months from now, let alone 7.5 years. Right? I got a quote today or last week where we want to order 9 PLCs, and I got a 175-day lead time on it. So it's just like I can't do anything anyway right now. 7.5 years from now, where are we going to be, Jeremy? I would say we're going to be in a manufacturing state where we're gonna be struggling with a lot of skills that were lost due to people retiring. The labor force is a critical thing where people are retiring, but I think a lot of it is the knowledge that's going to be lost along with it. So a lot of manufacturers are going to be in a discovery state of trying to figure out how to produce products and components that were lost by people who left the industry or retired. I think as well we're going to have a critical state of there will be a lot of manufacturing companies that might not be around in the next 5 to 10 years because they didn't adapt technology into their manufacturing processes, and that resulted in them not attracting a new workforce. That resulted in a lot of small to medium sized manufacturers right now where the owners are in their mid 50s, early 60s, and they don't have the ability to sell that company and move along and there's no one there to take up the reins and move it forward. And the value proposition they offer is minimal because there's nothing to support them. All the knowledge is built into the workers themselves who are all retiring as well. So
Yeah.
you're going to see a lot of manufacturing companies, I think, in the next few years, maybe no longer being around simply because they refuse to adapt to new the new, I guess you could say, digital manufacturing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the transformation itself, the adaptation is going to be a key element of survival. I mean, I would just add to that from what I'm seeing. A lot, you've touched on this too. A lot of the large organizations are, I think, similarly will struggle, and many of them will fail just because they have a harder time with change. And so,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We're already seeing that. We see this in the oil and gas industry. There's some major players have been displaced by mid-sized companies because they're just adapting better and transforming better.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, right? Whoever can change the fastest is going to be the winner at the end of the race. Like, I'm not going to I could have a conversation around Tesla, but why does Tesla have a higher valuation than all the automotive companies? Well, which automotive company do you think, if somebody needed to change, how quickly is that going to change?
Right.
If something needed to happen 6 months from now, tell me where would you bet your money in terms of a new car coming out or a new technology? Where would you bet your money? I know where I would bet it.
Yep, that's what I drive. I started, by the way, back in 2018 for kind of the same reasons you were talking about. I just wanted to bet. I wanted to help encourage them their success.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so cool to watch that develop. Yeah, I mean maybe the closing word on that is something we repeat here a lot, is that it used to be that the big eat the small fish, but it's the fast eat the slow fish is the way of the present and the future, which supports everything you're saying. I feel like I could talk to you about these topics all day, and I really enjoy it, Jake. I just would really just give you kudos for what you're doing. I think this is really important work in addition to your day job, and I just encourage you to keep doing it and getting the word out because it's really important stuff. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, not at all. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you just can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Jake Hall or the Manufacturing Millennial. Or if you want more information, you can go to themanufacturingmillennial.com. My information's there, or follow me on all the social stuff. But I guess my challenge to the audience here is who are in manufacturing, start working local. You can make the biggest change and the biggest impact yourself by getting involved locally with your community.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much for the message and for being with us. Again, it's Jake Hall, and Jake Hall is the Manufacturing Millennial. I'm Jeremy Frank, and this is the Industrial Transformation Podcast. Thanks a lot.